So today I have with me Steph Clarke, and Steph is a futurist and facilitator who leads teams and organizations to reimagine, plan for, and adapt to the future. Steph speaks and writes about the future and is currently writing a book about friendship. So, welcome, Steph. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kara.
I'm really excited to have this chat, and as we were talking about just before, there's such a interlink with change and connection, which is what this channel is about, and futures, and obviously friendship, the book that you're writing. So I'm really excited to get into this. I'd love to start with what is futures thinking? How do you introduce what that is?
Yeah. The best way I heard it described a couple of years ago is that the future thinking and strategic foresight, and I'll probably use both of those kind of interchangeably, is the study, ultimately it's the study of change. It is what are we doing right now, what's happening right now, and how might that look different in X period of time. Generally, kind of maybe start thinking about the next decade, like kind of 10 years or so in the future before things start to really kind of shift. Obviously, depending on the context of what you're looking at, like technology will move much faster than that. Social change maybe a little bit slower, that type of thing. So, yeah, context is important. But generally, it is about looking at what's happening now, what's happening at the edges, like where's the kind of fringe, weird, interesting things happening, and where might that be different, and how might that be different in a period of time.
Amazing. And how did you move into this space?
I read a book called Imaginable by Jane McGonigal, and I was like, oh, this is the work. This is the work I want to do. This is all of my favorite things together. It is, right brain and left brain. It is commercial, it is creative, it is provocative, it is, follow your kind of curiosities, rabbit hole type stuff as well. And it's, yeah, and it's got the elements of kind of design and other bits as well that I really am always, have always been drawn to and have worked in those spaces. I was like, oh, there's this field and nobody told me about it. And now I am obsessed. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And then I just started to kind of move my work closer and closer to that type of work. Which is I'm still doing, and yeah, I've been able to work on some really cool projects and side projects and things like that as a result, which is good.
Yeah, amazing. I love how you talk about how it's the study of change, because it is, yeah, we can't look at change in isolation in a time period. And
Mm,
futures thinking is such a unique space that we don't necessarily integrate into the day to day. And there are some really specific sort of techniques for us to open our minds to that.
mm.
How do you sort of get people to step out of the box and into sort of like really maybe starting with quirky or really open-minded futures thinking?
I mean, as with most things, it really depends on the group, the place they are at the moment, and I think it's important to know, and I suppose acknowledge that when I'm working with teams or organizations or groups or whatever it is who are in a really high stress situation, like when you're in those kind of high stress situations, your ability to actually think about the future is diminished, like kind of
Mm,
neurologically. So therefore, like you do have to really think about like how far can you push someone and where do you start? Because the last thing you want to do
mm,
is like tip someone over the edge or people over the edge and feeling completely overwhelmed. But what is really powerful is the ability, when we use some of the tools and techniques of futures thinking to paint a picture and help people feel the future. And sometimes that's, physically you might create something, or, at a kind of more extreme level of the end of the spectrum, you may go somewhere or create a space that actually feels like the future. And, or that, it feels like, and, and it's really important for it to have an element of similarity, but enough that your brain goes, oh, hang on, something's different here than it is in my normal life or in today or whatever. But when you help people feel the future, you help them kind of go, oh, okay, I maybe need to make some different decisions now, or I've got more agency maybe to change something now and change that trajectory towards where we might end up or where we could end up going. And yeah, and I think to me, that's the exciting part is how can you tip people into that place? Because what might feel really heightened and scary and stressful now, when you actually fast forward yourself to the future, it can still feel those things, but it feels in some ways sort of safer to play and safer to ask some harder questions or be like, oh, well, I might do this in this situation, or I might do that in this situation. That doesn't feel possible when you're in the moment, in the present. So yes, there's a bunch of different things you can do, and there's things like sort of scenarios and scenario planning, which I do with clients. We're basically writing narratives or stories that may play out in the next period of time, through to actually creating, what we'd call like artifacts of the future or stuff, the stuff from the future that may exist. And that might be a catalog or a mock-up or a representation of a piece of technology or something like that. And it doesn't
Mm.
have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be really slick, but enough to make people go, oh, actually, oh, how would I feel if that was in my home, or if that was, how my kids got to school, or whatever it is.
Mm. I love what you say about feeling the future and having that experience because you also preempted what I was thinking as well of what about when people are really stressed or
Mm,
anxious about the future? But I really like how you're talking about when people are in it or experiencing, having a felt experience of potential futures. Sometimes that can actually quell anxiety and you feel a bit more
mm,
in control.
yeah.
Um, and how important that experiential sort of element is to that. I really like that because it's
Mm,
also very at odds with, a very intellectualized society and way of working.
mm.
So it does bring together so many elements. You bring like the body and the mind and the emotions all together.
Yeah.
So that's
Well, and
really
actually,
cool.
from a kind of neuroscience perspective as well, and I'm no neuroscientist, but the studies they've done when you actually put someone in the position of thinking about a situation that may play out in their future and how they might respond and react, when they've done kind of fMRI studies with people who have, they've got to do that, they realize that it actually lights up the memory part of the brain. So even though they're just imagining being in that situation, it actually logs those thoughts, the decisions they made, the outcomes, all of those types of things in the memory part. So then in the future, if they find themselves in a similar or maybe even the same, although unlikely, but a similar situation, they can actually go back to that memory. And even though they didn't actually experience that, they just imagined experiencing that, it logs it and they like retrieve it from the same place. And they're like, oh, okay, I feel like I've kind of done this before, which of course means that we're then building our kind of internal preparedness for different situations.
I love that. That actually ties in, and I'd never made this connection before, but around visualization or sort of future
Mm,
priming visualization, why that is so powerful is exactly as you described. So that totally makes sense why how you'd integrate that with futures thinking. I love
mm.
that. Huh.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
And so how would we integrate that more into our day to day? Because I think your point that, there's a lot of stress, I see that in a lot of workplaces.
Mm.
When there's heightened stress, you're less likely to be planning forward into the future. What ways can we sort of bring that into our work more, especially when, the rate of change is just increasing rapidly? The stress isn't going anywhere.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Look, there's a bunch of different ways, at kind of really micro, daily kind of level, just kind of, I suppose, reading from different sources. And I think, so when I work with organizations, and it feels like especially at the moment, one of the challenges they find, or they tell me about, sorry, is that everyone is so like myopically focused on like what's right in front of them, like the thing that is
Mm,
happening to them in their organization that day, what's in their inbox, etc., etc. Even really senior people, which is even scarier, I think. And so, so some of the work I do with them, more in the kind of workshop or, kind of experience space is actually just helping them to sort of look up and look out and be like, oh, wow, there's actually stuff happening outside of our organization that we should think about as well. And not just maybe, maybe in their industry, maybe in the country they live in, maybe in the work, whatever it is. And also those things in the adjacent spaces, not just in their exact industry. Like, well, okay, well, what about this other industry that had a similar but not exactly the same challenge? And their legislation completely changed and they've had to all completely adapt to that. Like, what if that happens? Like, being able to kind of go do those what if conversations and to facilitate those, like that's so important. So, at a kind of daily, to come back to your question, at a kind of daily level, it would be, or weekly or whatever, is actually just having more conversations in your team about like, hey, what's anyone read this week? And it could be something completely unrelated. It could be an article about creatine and you're an accountant. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter like if it's completely related or not, but just to kind of build that muscle of like, oh, what are we observing? Like, what are we observing in the world? What are we kind of, and what sense are we making of those things? Like, why do we think that is a trend or something that people are talking about at the moment or whatever? Because it just builds that muscle and that habit of asking the next question around, I wonder why that is the case. I wonder why that's being heightened at the moment or that thing's going away or whatever. And I wonder then, the sort of next piece is, I wonder what would happen if that carries on. Or what if that thing that we talked about this week, what if that collides with the thing we talked about a month ago? Yeah, what if those two things, like, you start to then build these interesting pictures of what if and what might. And you don't have to do anything with those necessarily, but it just makes you a little bit more honed to spot interesting things. And then when something kind of comes along, you're like, oh, actually, that might really affect our industry. That thing that I've just read about what's happening in Germany or whatever. What if that comes here? And then you start to have those conversations as a team, like, over, and it could be over lunch, it could be, in a meeting or whatever. Like, hey, do you see what happened in Germany in our kind of industry? I wonder what the Australian version of that would be like. And then you start to have those conversations, and then you start to have oh, what would we do? How would we react? What skills would we, then you start to have those conversations. So it doesn't need to be in a, yes, I mean, I'd love for it to be in your offsites and for me to come and run those, sure. but the better outcome is that actually those are happening on a pretty regular basis. And then leaders are actually then having those at a more strategic level, obviously, and being able to kind of, stress test their strategies and their approaches to the world and their organization and their work, etc., to the what might and the what if.
There's so much in that. And yeah, I really agree with one of your earlier points as well of this is such a key part of leadership and having, that strategic thinking. And at the same time, I see there's this tension of when there's so much stress happening and when there's so much busyness and when BAU is just putting fires out, the ability to be strategic is limited. And
Mm,
so I see this like constant tension, and when that stress just keeps increasing, the need for this keeps increasing, but the capacity to actually do it is
mm,
is limited. Which is why I mean it's great to have those offsites, but as you said, like
sure.
integrating that
Mm.
is also important. And actually, that also brings me to your LinkedIn post, which I love, which bring all of those together, because it's interesting how you're saying like you are bringing connections from really diverse topics, and there's a need for a curiosity there and to start making connections and to having this sense making.
Well, and asking
And
the question, and yeah, that piece of there's a guy called John Sweeney who is a really awesome academic futurist. He does some really interesting work in Central Europe, but also globally. And yeah, he it was I was at a program that he was co-hosting, running beginning of last year. Anyway, he said, we need leaders who are willing to solve problems that they don't know how to solve, and kind of
mm,
and be able to leaders who are willing to ask questions that they don't already know the answer to, like that kind of thing. Like we need people who will like open that can of worms, even if they're like, I don't know what's in there and I don't know how to fix it, but we need to ask that question and we need to have a conversation about it. And I think so many people are unwilling to do that because they're like, well, I don't know how to contain that. And I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know if we can get through it in the next 30 minutes, which is all the time we've got allocated for it.
yeah.
And, and obviously we have to leave this meeting with the actions and the decisions like immediately. We can't just like have a longer conversation about that. That would be ridiculous. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really like that quote. And yeah, there's that pressure just keeps building, of course, because the less that you're looking at this, the more pressure is put on the industry and the more things just come out of left,
Mm.
out of nowhere, and it's a surprise, whereas it possibly could have been anticipated.
Well, and I think that's the thing, like so many, to your point around everyone's just fighting the fires and things like that. Like so many of those fires, probably a year ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago, it depends on the thing, were just little kind of like spot like matches or whatever, like on the
Mm.
horizon. But because no one bothered looking, they're now an inferno. It's
Yeah,
burning the house
totally.
down. And if only you'd done some good fire management, then
Mm.
and looked up and gone, oh, okay, we need to deal with that one. That one will burn itself out. That one, blah, 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 blah. But most of the stuff people are facing, are working on now furiously, is stuff that could have been prevented, but no one
Yeah.
bothered because they were like, oh, either it will be someone else's problem, or just no one looked up because there's no reward for doing that.
Mm. Yeah, and this really links to some, I think, some core elements in around like change and transformation, which are quite challenging, which is that it's hard to measure these kind of inputs,
Mm,
and it's hard to measure the direct outcomes of futures thinking or to have like a direct KPI or, a revenue return. Or it's just, and at the same time, I'm kind of thinking that these are actually the more important things. We can't actually measure them
mm,
yet, possibly one day.
mm,
I
mm.
don't know, but it's also our emphasis on being able to measure something means that we're actually missing out on some of the most important things.
Yeah.
And that goes again, I guess, change, connection of all kinds.
Yeah. And actually, Amy Webb, who's a futurist, who often does one of the opening keynotes at South by Southwest Austin, the proper South by Southwest every year, and has done for about 20 years, I think. And she does this amazing keynote about the weird and wonderful things happening, mostly in tech, but also in kind of like biotech and some of the other kind of areas as well. Anyway, her organization, who they renamed, I think they're called the Future Today Institute nowadays. But they are just going through a process of measurement of strategic foresight skills and things in organizations. There have been other studies done that, some of them get better kind of, I suppose, some are seen as more valid than others, I think is probably a fair way of a diplomatic way of putting it.
Yeah,
And
okay, yeah.
generally most of them show that companies who are more forward thinking and have a sort of more of a culture of strategic foresight are, better prepared and therefore have better returns and results and things. But yes, like I said, some of those studies have been kind of questioned a bit, I think. So yeah, so it'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see what Amy Webb's group come out with.
Yeah, no, that
Yeah.
will be interesting to keep up with.
Mm,
And it's
mm,
interesting because what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that's actually how we define leadership, and the core leadership skills needs to include things like the questions that you were talking about, asking
mm,
the hard questions that you can't answer, that you can't necessarily contain, but also that curiosity and that making connection. Because what you're saying about reading widely and being
mm,
open to lots of new information, also when we think about just the day-to-day lifestyle
mm.
and the information that everyone's bombarded with, there's actually, I assume, a limited capacity for most people to take in that information, but it's also for leaders incredibly important that they are obviously selectively
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
in a wide range of information and making those connections, which is
Mm.
a mental load and a mental capacity, but
Yes.
again, not easily measurable, which then makes it there's not much incentive.
Yeah, to do it. Yeah.
But
Unless I think there's people obviously who just do it because, and I've seen a couple of posts and sort of longer form articles on this recently, this idea of like research as a hobby. Like some people are just drawn to doing that. And some people will always, and I work with a number of clients who are like that, which is amazing because they're probably the ones who are, more at the forefront of thinking about these things. And then they're more open to, oh, actually, yeah, we should be thinking about these things that might happen and being ready and having good conversations about them. But I think, to your point around that as a leadership attribute, I think, curiosity, absolutely. And one of the themes, and actually I had a conversation with someone yesterday who was having this problem in some work they were doing as well, is, the amount of times I work with, senior kind of C-suite people and they're like lamenting about like the lack of strategic thinking and curiosity from the next level down. And they've got this real, like, this feels like there's this real gap at the moment between the sort of C-suite and then the next level down in terms of, leadership skills or, strategic thinking or whatever. And it's like, well, they've never been rewarded for that. So, and they've never been encouraged to do it. There was never like they've never had that kind of muscle built. Now, like I said, some people obviously will naturally just be inclined to do that, whatever. But yeah, they've sort of, all these sort of C-suite leaders, like, oh, the next level down, they're not kind of, thinking strategically or whatever, or they're not curious enough. I hear that a lot as well. It's like, well, they've never been rewarded for that. They've never been kind of in any way recognized or that been encouraged. You're measuring them on all these other things, which often go completely against those types of skills. So like this is on you as much as it is on them not being blah enough kind of thing. So yeah, which if I had
yeah.
$100 every time, yeah.
Well, what I'm hearing then is that, well, if we want to increase sort of these skill sets in organizations, one, for individuals and emerging leaders, it's developing that curiosity, that strategic thinking, the ability to ask questions, of being widely read and making connections. But then also for the senior leaders and for people in, who have influence in an organization, it's actually structuring the organization to reward those skills
Yeah.
so that your words align with the actions.
Yeah.
I love
Which
that.
again comes back to this AI thing as well, the kind of
Mm.
AI rhetoric at the moment around, there's all this rhetoric around like, oh, well, our human skills will save us and our curiosity and our creativity. And yet all those leaders who are kind of spouting that are often the ones still recognizing and rewarding people based on their technical outcomes, their financial metrics, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, in actually, at some point those things are going to collide, this kind of dirge of those skills you don't have, and then the fact that this other stuff is being replaced by or augmented or whatever by AI. It's like, well, that gap's just getting bigger. We need
Mm.
to kind of start to close that, ready for that kind of the overlap to happen, and for it to happen somewhat smoothly if that's the kind of trajectory we go down. But
Mm.
then the other, so just on, while we're on my soapbox, welcome to my soapbox. I think about this all the time. The PwC CEO survey that they do every year usually comes out around February each year. And the last couple of years, I think there's like this, this the kind of cultural piece on the list for different countries as well is really interesting. So one of the questions they ask in that survey is, if you change nothing and just carry on in your current trajectory, will your company, your organization still exist in 10 years' time? Really good
Mm.
question. Globally, the CEO survey says that only 55% of people, of CEOs, think that their organization will still exist in 10 years' time if they carry on the way they're going. In Australia last year in 2024, that was 85%.
Wow.
There is a 30% difference between the fact that Australian CEOs think that, yeah, I don't have to change anything, we'll still be good in 10 years' time.
Why do you think that is?
Delusion? No.
It sounds
To
like
be
it.
honest, I mean, I'm being flippant, but actually, I think that is. And actually, what was really interesting in the PwC survey, or the kind of the Australia kind of, because then each country or each kind of region does its own kind of cut of the data and stuff, obviously, and some commentary from like the leader, in that country or region. And actually, they said that they're like, we think Australia's leaders are a bit kind of possibly they use this exact word, but basically kind of deluded. Like that's
Mm.
they are not thinking far enough ahead if they think that they are ready for what's coming. Now, what was so that was in 2024. That was 85%. In 2025, it was 75%. It stayed static globally at 55. So, but there's still a 20% difference. But it was really interesting. If we think about what happened last year and that kind of like all of the kind of churn and weirdness of 2024 into obviously then into this year, which has continued, it was interesting to think about, oh, actually, have more people kind of been like, oh, actually,
Mm.
maybe not.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that it was actually, it's quite a big jump in 1 year. Yeah, so I think that's really interesting as well around the cultural overlay as well. And if we compare that to somewhere like, I can't remember the exact stat for this, so I won't try and make it up, but somewhere like, Northern Europe and Scandinavia and places like that, where actually foresight and strategic foresight tends to be a bit more bedded into the way they do the way they do business. I think that's, quite an interesting kind of cultural overlay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also quite concerning because, Australia is not going to be an outlier in how we're affected by the future in any way. It just
Yeah.
sounds like we'll be incredibly less prepared unless
Yeah, and I
something
think,
changes.
Australia has benefited from missing out, on a lot of big shocks over the last, century.
Mm.
Which is like, but I think a lot of that, I think there is probably a feeling that that was not just luck, and I think a lot of it was by distance, by not by design.
Mm.
Financial crisis, COVID to an extent, it's worse in some ways, but not in terms of death rate and stuff here. There's a bunch of things that Australia hasn't sort of suffered with as much as other countries. So we avoid the worst, but like you say, it's probably not by preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually quite shocking. But it also shows to me as well, even the 55% is, within 10 years, the
Yeah,
amount
yeah,
of change that every individual and every organization is going to be experiencing. And I also feel like even those who've acknowledged that a lot of change is
yeah, yeah.
happening, most aren't prepared to
Mm-mm.
facilitate the change or to deal with the change. So it's
Yeah.
sort of, yeah, that it's a big,
Mm.
there's a lot going to be happening
Yeah.
in the
I
coming.
just don't know if we really have the tools for it as well. Like Michael Bungay Stanier
Mm.
is doing some interesting stuff on change at the moment, and he recorded a podcast recently with the Ready, who are an awesome
Mm.
organization in the US, who talk about modern workplace design and some really cool provocative kind of conversations and prompts and things. And he was talking about the fact that we just don't have as you'll know, given your background, like the change management models just aren't fit for purpose anymore. They may have been
Totally.
at some point, but really they're just, but we don't really have good replacements. And so much of what we're facing actually can't be done, fixed with a model or a framework. It's much more sensed and much more adaptive, to use that kind of adaptive and technical kind of change word. So, we, unless it has a framework, we don't think it's real. And so therefore it's hard to, replicate or to coach or to teach or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is such a skill that actually this was part of a previous conversation with Gabby Pimstone, who talks
Mm,
about that as well in terms of like we don't have an alternative model.
Mm.
But and I've seen some really good thinkers talk about this on or through articles saying that, did the original change models even ever work? And
Yeah,
I
there is
can
that.
agree
That's a big
with
question.
that.
Yeah.
And it's like, whether they used to work or not, statistics indicate probably not. But
Yeah.
regardless of your opinion on that, they're definitely not going to work in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
Um,
all those like, get rich quick schemes. It's like one person did something once and they're like, this must be applicable to everyone. I will now sell that thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's also the idea that we can manage individuals, individual processes, and systemic processes with a checklist.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like,
With training. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But I also think it comes back to that human desire to to simplify, to measure, to
Or
have
to
that
control.
tangible, to
Yeah, yeah.
control, to intellectualize, and in companies and
Which is also quite a
organizations.
West, I mean, that's quite a
Oh,
kind of
totally.
colonial kind of, yeah, approach. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh no, you're so right. Yeah, and we've imposed that on companies everywhere. So that's just
Yeah,
how
yeah.
a lot of modern companies work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to that. Yeah, but it's going to be. I'm really curious to hear the outcome of Amy Webb's
Mm.
research too, because that'll
Yeah,
be.
it'd be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we need that needs to change too. And I'm curious, what is exciting you most about futures thinking? Because obviously you're looking at future in general, but like the
Mm.
future of futures thinking and the
Yeah.
application of it. And I think you sort of touched on it with like that massive gap in expectation around change. But what's exciting you in your field coming up?
Yeah, I think I'm really curious about the future of futures thinking. Yeah, to touch on that point that you raised there, and for those of us who have been through I suppose the maturity curve of things like design thinking, human-centered design as well. Seeing how that happened and like the kind of I suppose the impact of companies like IDEO on that field, and them kind of really kind of dominating in that, in terms of the models and the frameworks and the approaches and things, but then sort of seeing what's kind of they've come off the other side of that maturity model and maturity curve and everything. So it'd be interesting to see what the kind of the what how that plays out for futures thinking as well. And maybe a year or maybe even longer, it might have been 2 years ago, who even knows anymore. Time. There was someone who had like plotted like on the maturity curve like where all the lots of different these kind of models, frameworks, approaches, methodologies are. And futures thinking was on the kind of, even though it's been around for decades, it was still very much on the incline of kind of maturity. But what's really interesting about that is, just following along from a kind of, I suppose, inside outside perspective, is even just in the last couple of months, I've had a bunch of people come to me, and the reason they have come to me is because they asked someone else, hey, do you happen to know any futurists? Because they've kind of clearly heard of this concept somewhere. It's kind of new to them. They've asked someone else, oh, do you know someone? And they're like, oh, yeah, I should talk to Steph. And yeah, obviously there's heaps of us around. I'm not the only one. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see like just those little signals of maturity kind of on the ground
Mm.
as well, rather than just like, plotted in a graph or something. So that's really interesting. I'm interested to see like who, is there an IDEO of futures thinking? Institute for the Future probably would be, an easy fit in that space. But you wonder if someone else will emerge. So there's probably that piece I'm interested in just to follow along. And then, in terms of like future of dot dot dot, future of work is always just something I find very fascinating and overlays lots of the different things I do. But I'm really interested in the future of friendship, as we know, and then also the future of death and dying. Like I find that a really fascinating kind of subtopic that I like to kind of collect some signals and follow along on as well.
Amazing. The future of death and dying. That's so fascinating. What do you see in that space?
But it feels like there's like two things playing out at the moment. There's the kind of anti-dying kind of camp, which is the kind of longevity, live forever, Brian Johnson kind of, live in this like almost, unreasonable way that means that you are going to live forever or whatever, and this kind of like this sort of sense that death is optional, and particularly
Mm.
from this kind of tech bro kind of cohort, I suppose, or adjacent cohort, who have, clearly are that fragile that they're like, well, I must live forever because I can't possibly just like exit the earth.
Immortal.
That's what other people do. That's what poor people
Yeah.
do. I think there's some really interesting things there around future of health, kind of more broadly, that actually, maybe in huge amounts of money that some of these billionaires are putting into some of their own, experiments, does that actually speed up some of the development of therapies or approaches or something that actually end up, getting to market or whatever sooner for the plebs, for the rest of us?
Mm.
So, maybe there's some like good kind of good weird stuff that comes out of that as well. So I think there's some sub points there. So anyway, there's like the kind of the anti-death kind of crew. And then there's, I suppose there's then the other buckets. There's one around, like, I suppose just the amount of options now for people in terms of, it's not just buried or cremated. And actually, I wonder if in, half a century, those options actually might become illegal in a lot of places because of land use, because of pollution, obviously from a cremation perspective as well. So actually what other models there are, and there's a bunch of different ones being played with. You can be kind of frozen and blasted to bits and basically turned into dust. You can be kind of wrapped in a shroud, and then mushrooms and kind of mycelium kind of eat you up and you become one with the earth again. There's a bunch of different things there. So those kind of options for people as well. And then I think the other piece around, conversations happening just here in Australia, but also elsewhere in the world around kind of legalized dying and assisted dying kind of rules and things too, and how those social norms start to change around our acceptance of optionality around this.
Mm.
And I wonder, from a kind of dark kind of perspective, I wonder how many the kind of, I suppose, deaths of despair and kind of with the loneliness epidemic and things like that as well, where some of those things become allowed options for people. And which is a really, horrible thought, which, we kind of might want to try and avoid. But I wonder as well where we might see some overlaps between, particularly in more, maybe if things get more disconnected and, just harder for people to kind of have meaningful, real human connection with people. Maybe that's an option that people are able to take to opt out. And I think, the other thing with that is then, I suppose, kind of in the anti-dying crew, but also in a sort of a subset of that is digital twins. And actually, the fact you might live forever in a digital form and you still carry on working. And where does that money, like if you're still earning, like how does that your wealth get distributed to, whoever after you have left this mortal coil, because your digital likeness is still earning or in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all of those are so interesting because I think a lot of these developments, and that happens in a lot of just technological developments, is that,
Mm,
they can be used to save lives and for really good purposes,
mm.
and they can also be really misused. And what you were talking
And
about,
both at the same time, probably. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And some of them, it's like, well, depending on your lens, it could also be both at the same, yeah.
Yeah. Or it
And
starts as one and then it becomes the other. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's what you're talking about, especially about, the longevity and the tech bros and immortality. It's
Mm,
quite interesting because I feel like that's the final frontier of controlling nature. And
100%.
that's a very colonial sort of perspective of like we must control our environment, the earth, like we are in control of everything,
Yeah.
and this is that final frontier for us, or
Mm.
for
Or
by
that and
us, I mean
colonizing another
humans.
a whole starting again on a new planet. Like that's the other,
Yes.
between the two.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah, they got both covered.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but actually what
And if
all
not a new planet, just the South Island of New Zealand. That's the other bunker. So or
oh,
Kiwis.
it's pretty gorgeous place to go.
I mean, if there's worse places to build your billionaire bunker, but yeah.
Oh God. But yeah, what also what you're saying actually brings to mind an episode of, have you ever seen Love, Death and Robots?
Yes, I've seen it's like that's one that's got all the different cartoons, isn't it?
Yeah, very short
Yeah, yeah,
snippets.
yeah.
The stories aren't
I've seen a
connected.
couple of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Some of them are absolutely fascinating. A lot of them are in the future, but
Mm,
one of them really got me thinking, and links to that longevity sort of point where it was a world, it's all animation,
mm,
where longevity has kept people alive for hundreds of years, and having children is outlawed, it's illegal.
mm. Oh, because there's too many.
Because,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, population growth. And so you have people who look 25, 30, who've been around for 250 years, who've decided
Mm,
to opt out and illegally have children. And there are
mm.
police that are going around hunting, like it's such a dark,
Yeah.
dark, twisted one, but it's also really makes you think of, well, from the longevity perspective. And then on
Mm,
the other end of the spectrum, I read recently where the scientists in China who have developed robots that have babies for you, like
Oh yes, the
the
artificial
human
womb
wombs.
kind of. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, of then, well, okay, can really help with families who are struggling with infertility,
Sure.
for
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
but
yeah.
also could be used to farm children.
Yeah.
Like, where
Yeah.
there's so much
Yeah.
in all of that. So actually, yeah, the I think life and death in the future is such a fascinating space, but also something that you said it's hard to look at, but I think those are the ones that are really important to look at. Otherwise, they run away and we haven't shaped it, and we end
Oh,
up in some place where we're like, how do we get here?
you sleepwalk into it. And I think
Yeah.
this is the problem for so many, back to organizations as well, but also like as a society, you end up
Mm.
sleepwalking into these situations and like, oh God, how did we get here? This is horrible. And like we did this, like we all of us did this. Yeah. And yeah, anyway. Yeah.
And we're just not good at thinking about it. I think a lot of, you know, just in general, because of the pace of our lives, a
Because we're
lot of the time we're
distracted.
doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even in life. And it's like, oh, people get to an age and like, oh, how did I get here? I don't really
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like on a macro, micro scale, we're doing it.
And it's yeah, and the
Yeah.
future is you can't talk about the future without talking about history. And whilst
Yeah.
there is you have to kind of hold elements of that likely because lightly because there's so many things that just can't play out in the same way because of whatever technology, blah blah blah. But history does repeat itself, and it's even if it's not the
Mm.
same, it's got those kind of echoes of the past. So if we think about like the social media conversation, and a couple of years ago when all the AI stuff started to really kind of pick up and become kind of much more mainstream, what was quite cool is seeing people talk, being quite thoughtful and like signing these kind of manifesto-y things about we need to take this slowly and we need to think about this because look what happens with social media. It started as like this really cool interesting thing, and look where we are today. Look what it's the damage it's done, or
Mm.
certainly the way those companies have conducted themselves. Like social media in itself is kind of, I suppose, inert, but the way the organizations have run and again been rewarded, etc. Anyway,
Mm.
what can we learn from that so do not make similar mistakes or whatever? And yet, those things get very easily or quickly forgotten, it seems, because yes, there are lots of people kind of being like, hey, don't forget to like consider the bad things. There are
Mm.
also, there's like lots of like, yeah, we'll get to that. Or this kind of, particularly with AI, this kind of, oh, it's okay though, because AI will then fix those bad things. It's just like, you
No.
heard about the cane toads? Let's
Yeah, true.
talk about
So
cane toads for a moment. Yeah.
that, yeah, that's such a good point. And yeah, there's that, and this is why it's often not looked at because it's hard.
Yeah,
Like
and it's
it's
ugly and
complicated.
it's gross and
Yeah.
it's political or it's become political and we have to have conversations about what we believe and
Mm,
yeah, no one wants to have that mirror or whatever and confront
mm,
themselves or confront like what's
yeah.
really driving the decisions they're making.
Yeah, you're right. I love that because it's confronting ourselves and having hard conversations, which a lot of us are not good at, and talking about our values, which either might be controversial or people don't know what they are to
Or aren't
start
formed.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can see why, yeah, future thinking is extremely important, but also why a lot of people aren't doing it because it is genuinely a lot
Mm.
to bring together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But increasingly important, and that's where we can have an edge too over
I
AI.
hope
I
so.
mean,
Yeah, I'd hope so. Yeah.
yeah. But I'm really curious as well to hear about this book. So,
Oh
with
yeah.
all of your focus in the future space, what got you interested in writing this book, and what is that looking like?
I mean, the catalyst was someone sent me a good friend of mine sent me an email that she had received from someone else, like a newsletter kind of thing, and a bit was about birthdays, and this person had just celebrated a birthday, and it was how important it was to celebrate your kind of milestone birthdays, and I was so enraged. It was obviously a bad day. It was like a Sunday afternoon or something. I don't know why I was so angry, but I was so angry because I was just like, no, we shouldn't just be celebrating our milestone birthdays. We should be celebrating like whatever we want, like make up stuff to celebrate. Like this
Mm,
is, yeah, anyway. And then I just had that like kind of click and I was like, oh, maybe this is the book. And friendship is definitely something I have always taken quite seriously and always found a lot of joy in. And when I moved to Australia from the UK, it was something I was like incredibly intentional about. Like, right, how am I not just going to end up hanging around work people? Because I saw people do that a lot when they moved to the UK, when I was, working with lots of people from all different countries, and often they'd end up kind of a lot, hanging around with work people a lot. Not a terrible thing, like that's not a bad thing, but yeah, it's hard to kind of break out of that. Anyway,
Mm.
so just definitely have always had kind of that I suppose natural inclination. And then yeah, so I was like, oh, maybe this is what the book should be about. And so over a period of time that became it was kind of called Beyond Birthdays for a while, was its kind of holding title, and then got renamed How to Friend after a good conversation with a publisher, and who is not who I'm publishing with, but just through a kind of working kind of conversation. Yeah, so yeah, it's something I'm really enjoying talking about and thinking about and having conversations with people on and running workshops on and doing keynotes and stuff on. And it just feels so pertinent at the moment as well. We're on this again, this, it's exactly to your point, we're on this kind of precipice, and we're either going to sort of step off into, a completely strange dystopian, quite damaging, future, or certainly near future, where we are more reliant on, chat GPT than the group chat kind of thing. Or we're going to kind of hold those things and, still use some of those tools in the way that they're useful, but really maintain kind of connection. And I think in this kind of, strange, divided, post-truth kind of world that we're in, like having strong family and friend connections. And I read sort of topic I like to read about is conspiracy theories. And and what's really interesting is, in so many of those books and sort of writing, and the experts who specialize in conspiracy theories and things, the antidote to a lot of those is friendships and your family connections and things as well. Because if
Mm.
you've got a stable base of people who are not necessarily fighting you on every kind of weird thing, you end up kind of, those people end up kind of falling down these holes for various reasons. The things that bring them back are seeing people living kind of normal lives around them a lot of the time, and having that support still. And that's really hard to do. And it's, for some people that it just falls apart because it goes too far and whatever. But yeah, I just think there's such a strong need at the moment for good social, connectedness.
I
There always has
couldn't
been,
agree
but
more.
it just feels even more
Yeah.
pertinent now.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think I agree that there always has been, but it's also harder to maintain that in our current world. And so it
Yeah.
becomes even more important because it has to be so much more intentional. Like we're not built around community anymore. We're built
Mm,
around like perhaps a nuclear family or very small
mm.
circles and then work. And if you're not in a nuclear family, then it's probably just work, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
unless you make that intentional. And then, of course, making friends as an adult can be quite
Mm,
challenging.
mhm, mhm.
And depending on people, there are certain periods of life where a lot of people have kids, so then their life revolves around the children, and so
Yeah,
and then of course they don't have the village support that they need
yeah, yeah, yeah,
either.
yeah. Yeah, no
Um,
one's no one's really winning in this kind of
no.
way we kind of currently exist and, yeah, live, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about that because I think I couldn't agree more about the importance of connection. And I'm sure, you mentioned it as well, like coming to a new country, and I've found as well, like moving overseas, you really do have to make a conscious effort to be connecting with others, and it is a skill that you
Mm,
build, which was sort
yeah.
of kind of mostly forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And some places make, some it's easier and harder in some places than other. If you like move to New York or London, like it's hard in some ways because they're big and they're busy and there's, just heaps going on, but they're quite transient. So there's a lot of people who are not from there and they're like, yeah, cool, let's be friends because they want people to hang out with as well. It's funny, I've had a couple of conversations recently, over a couple of years. But apparently Brisbane, like I've just know a few people who have found Brisbane very hard to kind of settle in and make friends, and they've given it a go for a few years and stuff, and it's just yeah, it's a more difficult place, it seems. And I wonder how much of that is because Brisbane is probably a bit less transient than like a Sydney. Melbourne's probably a bit of a weird kind of sort of hybrid, but yeah, but particularly comes somewhere like Sydney. So yeah, whereas Brisbane's like, oh no, I've got my friends that I've known for a whole life kind of thing. So I'm good. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the same in Canberra. I've heard a lot of people who are new to Canberra. It's just it can be very clicky. Again,
Mm.
not intentionally, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's just people have a certain amount of capacity. They've got their friends from when they were kids or at work
Yeah.
and sort of reach their limit. And
Yeah.
but I'm curious again about how even like the cost of living crisis
Yes.
impacts our
Yeah.
ability to make friends because we're not going out
Mm.
as much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm in the middle of, I've got like a half a newsletter written. It will go out in the next couple of weeks, because I've recently moved out of Melbourne, about 100 kilometers out of Melbourne. Um, and so have done the opposite and have like left my friends in Melbourne behind.
Mm.
And so, no, and again, obviously they're still my friends. It's fine. Everything's fine. But yeah, also trying to make friends again in a new town. But with a, different, it's very different to moving to the other side of the world. But there is, it's a lot of the same kind of, I suppose, intent and mindset and stuff. But that the thing I've noticed from, just the last sort of 5 months or so is, people seem to really want connection, but they don't want commitment. And those
Mm.
two things as well. And they still want that kind of, they still need this bit of convenience. And I think, in the keynote I've got about friendship and the future of friendship, my kind of, I suppose my kind of, call to action or whatever at the end is, we need to look for friction, that we need to embrace the sort of friction in life with when it comes to other people, like the messy, human reality of other people, because otherwise we're just going to fall into the convenient, cold, sycophantic arms of robots and, bots and things as well. So we've got to, put up with the friend who's kind of hard to pin down for a catch up, and we've got to kind of put up with those things. And there's this kind of phrase that's doing it the rounds around the internet at the moment, which is annoyance is the price you pay for community.
Ah, I love that. Yeah, I've seen a variation of that, and I couldn't agree more because I think I was actually, yeah, curious about that future element too. Obviously, I'm sure that's a very part of it too, but with AI and with optimizing everything like this culture of optimization, but increasingly also a culture of boundaries, which can be very healthy, but
Mm.
unless they're understood properly, can go too far. And
Yeah.
it's like this culture of convenience, optimizing boundaries,
But
AI
this kind of
or
well, just on that boundaries point, like this
yeah.
like culture of like therapy speak.
Yeah, oh, so true. Yeah, it's
That's a
when
whole other
it's
soapbox. But yeah, anyway.
yeah, no, it's so true though, because it's there's so much value in the therapy, but when it's
Yeah.
taken out of context, it's more unhealthy than
And just
when
flung
it
around. Yeah,
started.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the other thing I saw the other day, so this annoyance is the price you pay for community. I've just like
Mm.
I come back to that all the time whenever I'm annoyed with someone, basically. But also, but then I saw someone post the other day. It was, annoyance is the price you pay for community, but actually maybe a more powerful reminder is that loneliness is the price you pay for convenience.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I thought, oh yeah.
And that's something that everyone has to reconcile as well with. I think that also goes back to when we're talking about organizations and futures thinking is like we actually have to get more comfortable with discomfort and with annoyance and with hard
Mm.
conversations because that's what also facilitates connection. You can't
Yeah, yeah,
have sustained connection without that or commitment, which is a risk you might, get
yeah,
hurt in whatever context. But
yeah, yeah.
if you don't, isolation and
Mm.
loneliness. So, yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for this book. And you say you do some keynotes on it as well.
Yeah, so I've got a keynote which is it's about the sort of the power of connection against the robot rebellion. So yeah.
Ooh, oh, that sounds amazing. Well,
It's a
if you've
fun
got
one.
any
Yeah, yeah,
upcoming
yeah.
events, I'll be able to link them in the
Yeah, I don't have any at the
notes.
moment, but open to offers. But yeah, I did it.
Okay,
I've done
good.
it a couple of times already this year, at various conference and then at a sort of smaller kind of social kind of thing. But yeah, go to my website for bookings.
Amazing. Yeah. Oh, it's exciting. And if more come up, I will link
Yes,
them
yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. No, I'll let you know if there's any more to we can add. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to ask this question to wrap up, and I think you've touched on a lot of it, and it actually might just be your keynote. But if you
Mm.
had the opportunity to speak to one topic for a whole hour to an engaged audience, and soapbox is all yours, what's the topic or what are the messages that you feel like is most important to communicate right now
Mm.
in this point of time?
Yeah, I think, I mean, my sort of joke answer would be like how small dogs are pointless and you should get a cat instead. But then, like, we talk about that for an hour. But on a more serious note, it would be it just, at this point around, we have to choose people, like, we have to choose each other. And at the moment, like, as you mentioned, we're just at this sort of tipping point that we could end up, as you said, kind of going like turning around in X period of time, being like, oh no, how did we get here? And it's hard to go back. And I think for every movement, there's always a counter movement and all of those types of things. So we are already seeing these kind of groups of parents who are not letting their kids have smartphones, but they're all installing home phones, like hard landlines into their homes so that the kids go home from school and pick up the phone to each other like most of us used to do.
That's
And they're
cool.
loving, these kind of like pods of parents that are doing that. Yeah, super cool. So you can still, again, there are these little like glimmers, these like subcultures or these like groups that are just doing these things, which is really great. And I think it'd be really interesting to see, how some of those become more mainstream, or where we start to reject some stuff as well. But also we might end up rejecting some other things by accident. Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to hear that talk.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, the small dog one, I'll just cover my little puppy's ears.
Yeah. Oh, if it's a puppy, that's okay. Small puppy, that's okay. It'll grow into big dogs. So
Yeah, indeed. Oh, thank
yeah.
you so much for joining me today, Steph. I really love this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to read the book.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing it. So
I'm sure.
yeah.
Oh, thanks so much.